Welcome to Conversations with Laurel, everyone. I am your host, Laurel McCargue, and today's very special guest, Jenny Chan, is going to talk to us about the hidden history of the Pacific Theater, which you might not know anything about. Maybe you know a lot about. I didn't know a lot about it until recently. Jenny, welcome to Conversations with Laurel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so very welcome. Jenny, how did you, and you look like a young woman, how did you first get interested in World War II?
I actually wasn't that interested in World War II. I didn't come from like a history major background per se. But when I was growing up, my grandma, whenever I turned on the TV, she would get so upset about like watching Japanese anime. And she would say something like, oh, these people, you're going to get brain rot, and these people are like turned up heads, they're going to kill people, and blah, blah, blah. You just never know. And I was thinking, like, wow, why is my grandma saying all of this? And it sounded like kind of racist, but then at first I thought she was just demented, and I didn't really
Oh,
know what was
wow.
happening with her. Um, and then, um, and then eventually, after she passed away, I found like a box of military. We found like a whole box of like military yen and like rice rationing coupons. And she was in Hong Kong at the time during the occupation uh, of Hong Kong, and it was done by Japanese. And like, and then when I put the two together, I was Googling like what is military yen. Like I was trying to like search for. I was describing it. There wasn't any image search back then, so I was describing what that piece of paper was. And then I realized that she, by the amount of military yen that I saw, she probably traded in a lot of the money that they had into military yen. And after the war, it wasn't worth anything. And so then I started understanding where that hatred came from. And to this day, I have to say I regret a lot about not talking about like just assuming that my grandma was like, demented, and I didn't really talk to her about what was happening and whatnot. And then that's when I started like diving really deep into World War II in Asia just to figure out like what happened to my grandma that she had this kind of reaction and she was so triggered. And as you know, I grew up in the United States, and I would say that most of my history class, we learned about like European theater. We learned so much about Hitler. We learned so much about like what had happened to like the Holocaust, right? And then we watched like one movie on Pearl Harbor, and then we watch maybe like a scene from the atomic bomb, and then we talk about like the atomic bomb. We never really talk about what had happened between Pearl Harbor and the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Just even that is so not talked about. Um,
Yeah.
and so then when I was like, uh, and so then in my mind, because occupation of Hong Kong happened like 8 hours after Pearl Harbor, and I actually didn't even know that it was like the same war until like I started reading more about World War II. Kind of doesn't feel like it's the same war because it's like
Right.
in my mind, I'm like, okay, Hawaii and Hong Kong are like so far apart, but it was the same war. And so then that's why, and then after I read more like about like the rape of Nanking, for example, and also like the flags of our fathers and like other books about World War II, I realized I pieced it together. I'm like, oh, it was the same war. And like
Yeah.
The Rising Sun by John Toland was really illuminating. And so I was working at this really boring job, and I was looking for like maybe switch field and see like if there's any organization that focus on going into this rabbit hole, like what I was researching, and like maybe I can become an analyst at some organization like that. And I couldn't find anything. And so that's why I founded the organization to kind of bridge this gap. And I started doing a lot more like digitizing the primary source documents from the National Archives, and also interviewing people who have gone through the experience.
So,
And
so
so,
if I could
mhm.
jump in right there, you talk about your grandmother, and obviously she had stories and she had history. And isn't it true of most people that, we don't typically talk about our past? I mean, I think about our own sons, right? And how little they know about what we've done in our past, because it's not like you're at the kitchen table and they say, "So, Mom, when you were, 8, what did you do?" It just doesn't come up organically a lot of times. And
uh,
so I think a lot of us, we look at the older people in our lives, and after they're gone, we say, "Oh gosh, I wish I had asked. I wish I had known." So I think you're not don't feel bad about not knowing that stuff, because again, if it's not offered, and I think a lot of people don't want to, maybe, I don't know, maybe they don't want to brag about what they've done. Maybe they don't want to go back there because it was horrible. So,
I
it's
think
not,
so, yeah.
it's not your fault. But so you end up with this question because you found this box from your grandmother that just opened up all kinds of questions, like a Pandora's box, right? And all of a sudden, you're the co-founder of a nonprofit organization, I believe, called Pacific Atrocities Education, correct?
Correct. Hmm.
All right, so you're the co-founder. Tell us about this mission and how you started this.
Yeah, and I founded it just to bridge this gap that, I saw in my own education that I never really learned history. Like, I didn't even know about why we dropped the atomic bomb. And then if you think about it, we don't learn about like the whole thing of what had happened. And then we talk about the atomic bomb, but then we don't talk about the 30 million, I mean, that's the lower estimate, or to like 42 million people who like died in Asia from like Japanese occupation. And so we're trying to, and so that's why we digitize these records from the National Archives. And also we collect, uh, like we do oral interviews with people who have fought in the World War II, like even these guerrilla fighters in the Philippines. And I think by digitizing these records, we're actually moving like these stories from like a dusty box from the archives to the fingertips of like students and also like people who have gone on our website or like people who have gone on our social media to see what had happened in history.
So
And yeah,
your mission is to basically get more information into the educational system. Are you how is it going? I mean, how can you change textbooks? And at what age
textbooks
would you
are
want?
hard to
Yeah.
do, but like teachers, we have done like webinars. We have talked to teachers one-to-one before. And so then to add it to their curriculum per se, they can do one day about like the war in the Pacific. And I think that's been a thing that we've been doing. Last year, a group of high school students reached out to us because they found our website and then they found out about Unit 731, which was like a biological weapons lab.
I was going to ask about that. And again, you have some books out there, and I'm going to have links to everything we're talking about below. So,
Yeah.
yeah, tell me more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was pretty amazing for me because I was thinking like, wow, high school students can find our website. And so then they're like doing self-education now on the internet. And then they enroll in like they made this documentary and then they enrolled in like National History Day and won first place in New Mexico.
Oh,
And they were telling me that like no one, I mean, no, the judges and the teachers had no idea what they were talking about. So their little documentary that they made actually like kind of impact other people. And she was saying that like at first when she was thinking when they did it, they weren't thinking about winning. They were just thinking about like maybe showing it to their peers and so then more people know about this topic because millions of people died in Pacific War and they felt like Unit 731, which was like a lab that produced so much like medical atrocities, deserved some kind of mention in. in at least in their classes, but it was never mentioned. And they felt like it was 90% Hitler, and they don't really get to explore this kind of this angle of the war. And so then when they won first place, they were really surprised.
Is this documentary still out there? Like, could you send me a link to it? Do
I
you
think
know?
so. Yeah, I think they
Uh,
put it up on YouTube, so I
all
can
right,
send it to you.
send me that. I would love to have a link to that um, below. So, oh my goodness. So this for my own education, right? The first marathon I ever did was the Bataan Memorial Death March Marathon. I did it in 2011. There were still three survivors from Bataan
Um,
at that event, and it was an incredible event. I wrote a story about it. I'll have a link to that too below. But I would not have known about that had not our elder son. He was in ROTC. His ROTC unit was running in it, and so my husband and I decided, well, we're going to go do it too to support them. And it was such an emotional and educational experience. It was incredible. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know about Bataan. I didn't know the Bataan Islands are like a series of what, 14 islands. It just, you could, I guess history teachers can only cover so much. And so, gosh, tell us more about Unit 731.
yeah, so Unit 731 was like a biological lab in occupied Manchuria by Japan. And they were running all kinds of human experiments. For example, they were testing anthrax. They were trying to see how to powderize anthrax so then they can make better weapons. They made these porcelain bombs of flea bombs. So they were then having they have fleas to be infected with plague, and then they would drop the porcelain bomb onto the floor of like the grounds of people, and and that would cause like the whole like village to perish basically. Um,
And the people were not aware of this, or
so when they first started Ishishiro started it in Japan. And I have to say this is not a rogue individual because he did because the emperor was was like a biology enthusiast. And so he actually got funding from the emperor. So this is not like a rogue kind of project. And then he started it in Japan. And then when he realized that he needs like humans for human experimentation, he thought, okay, if I do it in like the capital, that's going to be too out there and people are going to call us parts of government and I'm going to get shut down sooner than later. But then when Japan conquered Manchuria, he thought, well, that's going to be a great opportunity. So he actually went with his friends to start like this kind of to have a road trip to explore Manchuria and to see where he could put his lab. So at first he established it in like a soy sauce factory. And then eventually he thought, well, and then but then there were prisoners who got out. And so he thought, well, I need to move it because it is too small and my prisoners are still able to get out. So he went over and took over a whole village and he erected like so many buildings. So there were like buildings for his staff members and then there were like he even had like an anti-testing ground where he had his own plane and he would drop these porcelain flea bombs onto like his prisoners to test the flea bomb, like how it works and whatnot. And then they also had like this laboratory where they were testing G-force and seeing what is the human limitation on getting G-force. And they were doing vivisection as well, which was like cutting open the human without any anesthesia because they believe anesthesia was going to make the body weaker or like make it react slower. And so they wanted to see like firsthand how it goes. So there were like anthrax, there were like plague that they were testing, and there were like many other diseases. And because Manchuria is so cold, they were also able to test like frostbites. So they would put the prisoners outside and then like expose them to the cold and then cut open their limbs and see how the cold was affecting their bodies. And that's how they actually learned how to cure frostbites was from Unit 731. And so yeah, it's just like very heavy experiments like that. Yeah.
And so the Unit 731, were these just civilians that that he imprisoned?
At first, they were suspected guerrilla fighters from China or Russia or Korea, but then eventually it was just anyone who was basically like homeless with nowhere to go, and they were found on the street. They have no family members. Those are like the easiest people to get because no one's looking for them essentially. Yeah.
So you're talking about, you mentioned total war in a previous note, and its effect on the civilian population. So how does this talk about the effects on the civilian population?
Yeah, I think that, they don't affect on, I mean, when you have a total war, we don't really think about war. When we watch movies, like a war is happening, like, in a setting, in a nice setting. But then, like, when you actually think about war, it's actually happening in like civilian situation, like atrocities like Nanjing massacre, right? The cities are destroyed. They're not like accidents. These are like, you know, military philosophy that kind of saw civilians as obstacles. And so they just get rid of all these people. And even Bataan Death March, right? I mean, those people that were actually helping the soldiers to march in the Bataan, which was like 65 miles. And there were civilians who were giving them water and food, and those civilians were beheaded with the people who were receiving food and water in some cases. And so if you think about it, for an average person in a war, in a total war, it means that there's actually no front line. Like everywhere is a front line. And they become a target, whether they're in a hospital, school, or like a rice field.
Yeah. Again, talking about Bataan, and again, tens of thousands of people died. Filipinos
Yeah.
and
And it's
the
not
United
like,
States.
yeah, and it's not like pleasant death. It's
No,
like they die from like starvation. They die from like they had to hide their water because they weren't sure if people were going to steal their water. And it's not just like, and right after the march, they were then put on like hell ships.
to talk about the hell ships. Yeah, again, I
Yeah.
had no idea about those. I mean, I knew about the atrocities. I knew that if you fell during the march, you died, right? And
hmm Actually,
what?
there was a funny story too. Like someone was wearing a Notre Dame ring, and the Japanese officer was like, "Oh, I watch football. I really like this team," and then like spared his life. And so I think that was like an interesting story. But so hell ships were like exactly what happened after the Bataan Death March. So they ship these people onto like boats and they try to get them into other like labor camp. So
These are
it's
the
not that they,
Japanese. These are the
yeah, the
Japanese. Yeah.
Japanese loaded them onto boats. And so then some people from the Bataan Death March actually ended up in like parts of Manchuria. There was a POW camp called Hoekton Camp. And in the Hoekton Camp, they were making like Mitsubishi Zero airplanes. But because their bodies were already so weak from the Bataan Death March, and it's so cold at Manchuria that every single day someone would die from someone like an American prisoner would die because of the brutal situation that they were in. And they were forced to make like Mitsubishi Zero airplanes. And so then some of these prisoners just thought like, okay, maybe I can sabotage this situation and and make it not so then the factory is not able to operate as well as before. And so then there were like stories about them like trying to hide a socket here and socket there and trying to
Yeah, yeah,
sabotage the airplane making a situation. And I thought those were very funny stories. But then there were also stories about how they were trying to test vaccines from Unit 731 onto because Hoekton was so close. And so then they try to test the vaccines that they produce at Unit 731 also onto the POWs that were captured in Hoekton. But I want to go back to hell ship because in order
yeah,
to get to Hoekton, they needed to take hell ships. And these hell ships are like really cramped situations. And the whole idea was to efficiently ship these POWs from one place to another. So then they're like forced to do, so then it's like they want to pack as many people in there as possible because the Japanese Empire, in order to have the engine running, they needed labor, but all of the men were actually out fighting wars. So there was really no one doing labor in like all throughout Japanese empire. So they had POWs mining coal, they had POWs, making Mitsubishi Zero airplanes, like what I was just talking about. But like these hell ships were pretty awful themselves because they were packed shoulder to shoulder. And so then it was very unreasonable condition. Like 50 people were sharing one bucket to go to the toilet.
mm,
And there was really like there was no food on board and people were dying from like beriberi.
mm,
And yeah, there was this one particular hell ship because these hell ships were really unmarked. And so then there was one called Erisa Maru, and they were shipping people from like Camp O'Donnell to like somewhere else. I think it was Camp O'Donnell. And they were carrying like close to 1,800 American POWs. And but then because the ships were unmarked, they were actually shot down by USS Shark's torpedo. And
ah,
out of the 1,800, guess how many people survive?
I have no idea.
8.
Oh,
Because of how so the Japanese at the time, even though that they were sinking with the ship, they closed the dock, they closed
yeah,
the deck.
yeah,
They
yeah,
closed the deck so that no one can escape
yeah,
because they were afraid that, if they escape, then they become a hostile force. And
yeah,
so then they closed the deck. And so then, and there were also Japanese destroyers nearby pushing the swimming Americans back into the water with
yeah,
poles
yeah.
or like
Oh,
trying to shoot those people who were trying to survive, which is such a,
war
with
crime.
eight, yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
And if you think about it, with 1,800 people on a ship, like you expect at least half the people to survive,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But yeah, it's just,
So
and
those
that's,
are I was gonna say those are the hell ships are I guess analogous to the cattle cars, right?
mhm.
Of the the Jewish people. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, it's such a
but
grim
oh, it
conversation
is.
in
It
the
really
early morning.
no, it really is. But again, there's so little that we're taught. Uh, it's horrendous. I think people are well, I won't say. Talk about the American strategy of island hopping,
Yeah, I think that's
that
actually
campaign.
a interesting thing because like, we were talking about house ships and we were also talking about like Bataan Death March. And so
Yeah,
like if you think about it, in those 2 years of like 42 and 43, America was actually really losing the war and China was also losing the war. And at the same time of island hopping, and it's such an interesting story to think about the island hopping because the island hopping got America closer to the Japanese mainland. And and at the same time, Operation Ichigo, Japan was actually winning China, but because they were so spread out in China, that America had like this time to go to look more into like the islands that were closer to Japan. And, we're often taught that like Saipan and basically Iwo Jima were basically strategic stepping stones for like the bombers. But like for in that period, like for the 140,000 of Allied POWs and like millions of civilians that were in Asia, like every day the United States didn't advance in the island hopping, then it was like basically a day of like them experiencing slaughter because, they really needed this island hopping to succeed. And so I think it's like as the US got closer to Japan, the Japanese command like kind of issued this order to dispose like prisoners to kind of prevent their liberations. I was reading James Bradley's book Flyboys like years ago, a decade ago. And it was also interesting to me because, Iwo Jima was actually winning. They were actually, even though there was so much sacrifice. If you think about it, Iwo Jima was such a small place, but there were so
Teeny
many,
little island. Yeah.
yeah, it's a teeny
Teeny
island, but
little island. Yeah.
and so many Marines sacrificed for to win this war. And at in an island in like Chichijima, that's actually where like a few pilots actually lost their lives, and then later they got cannibalized.
Ugh.
But George Bush actually also was one of the pilots who fell in Chichijima, but he was actually rescued by a submarine. And so if you think about it, all these pilots who were later killed and cannibalized, they could have been like George Bush, right? Like George Bush, then I'm talking about senior George Bush.
Right. Hmm.
We're talking about how like and he was a businessman. He was like, he was basically head of CIA, vice president and president. What if those people get to survive, right? In the island hopping situation, then we could have had so many more successful people.
So explain exactly what island hopping was. Like, what was the strategy? That was the strategy to
Get
get
closer to
to
mainland Japan
Japan. Yeah.
so then
Okay.
they can actually eventually win the war.
Yeah. Again, something else that we were not taught.
And my husband's like um grandma's family member actually lost his life island hopping. And to this day they had no idea where the body is. And they
Yeah.
keep doing like, they ask a lot of the Air Force members and he got a Purple Heart and everything, but I think for the family they wanted his body to come back.
Mm.
But, if you're losing your life in the island hopping, but all his life he wanted to be a pilot, so I guess that's he at least got to be a pilot.
Yeah. Yeah. How can history heal? Can it?
I think
You know,
that's a great question, and I think there are so many like so I recently I we wrote this blog post about how these B-9 bombers essentially like lost their lives and what had happened to them. They were eventually vivisected at Japan's like mainland and whatnot. In front in like 1945 in front of like a college like lecture, and those
ugh,
records weren't even declassified until like the 1990s from the Yokohama trials. So like these are like nurses and doctors who were doing that. And actually, a grandnephew of the pilot reached out to me and told me that, like, thank you for actually talking about that on your blog post. And to this day, he was telling me how he was going to write to the Air Force to get like an official documentary, to get an official document of how his, grand uncle basically died and how there was like a family of three that missed like 1/3 of their family forever. And I think like and as things get declassified as we write blog posts, people get some kind of a closure of what had happened to their family members.
yeah.
And for some people, I mean, we think about it as like 80 years ago, and
Yeah.
like a lot of times, like people would just say like for the last 80 years, like, oh yeah, he died in the Pacific, but like there's no specific answer as to how he died in the Pacific. And so I think we're trying to get people like people's family members some closure of what had happened to them. And I do like podcasts with James Bradley, and he talks about it when he was writing Flyboys, and he learned about cannibalism in Chichijima. The first thing he did was pick up the phone and call these family members to tell them so that they can get some kind of closure about like how their family actually went. And
Yeah.
so I think it's also provide and the power of like knowing what had happened and also the power of a name. So like when we find this kind of name and like provide information, I feel like we're providing a historical burial and breaking and families breaking like silent decades of silence once they have the facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, that's how we see it.
Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing. Um, how can people learn more about Pacific atrocities, education, and support your mission?
They can go on our website, pacificatrocities.org. We also have a YouTube channel, Pacific Front Untold, and they can learn more. And yeah,
All right. Um, and yeah, I definitely want the link to that documentary if you can get that. And so you made a point earlier about education, and it's hard to change uh, textbooks. It's hard to change the curriculum that schools already have, but people are learning a lot more on their own. And just like you, how you got a little grain of something and that just opened your curiosity to learn about all the stuff that we just didn't know about. Have we learned anything from history though? I mean, are we as a people capable of learning from history? Because I don't know, current events kind of indicate that we can't.
I know
Well,
it's
I
so.
hope you feel more optimistic about that.
I think a lot of what media too, that media like talking points, I think people need to also think more critically and learn from history. Like learn, there were some that's why I'm really grateful for people like you who do like independent podcasts so people can like learn from like normal people and like
Yeah,
lived experience.
normal. Am I
Yeah.
normal? Yeah.
Well, well, not like normal, normal,
Yeah.
but like, like just learn from each other and
Yeah.
also learn from history. I think that would be a good thing to start. And yeah, wars are just terrible. And no matter how it goes, no matter winning or not winning, war is nasty business.
And history is written by the victor, right? Uh, yeah,
And it's also interesting too, because like people who actually survive and actually won, right? Like they then lived with like decades of PTSD.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they were on the winning side or losing side. I have talked to Japanese like uh, this guy named Kuroi, his father was he didn't realize that his father was having PTSD.
Mm.
And he was saying that the way he knew his father was such a nasty guy. But then he found like albums of his father before the war, and he was actually smiling. He looked like a
Wow.
kind man. He wished that he had known his father before his father was shipped to a war. And also James Bradley felt the same way, about his father was having PTSD like after Iwo Jima. It's not easy to go. I mean, even killing one person is nasty, but like imagine going out and like killing like thousands of people. That's going to change people.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about survivors. So our family just completed the latest Bataan Memorial Death March. on the 21st of March in White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, and they shortened it from a marathon distance to 15.6 miles because of intense heat. And and I was thinking, why? Why would you do that? Because, we're memorializing these tens of thousands of people who suffered and died on this, and they're trying to make it a little bit easier for us. Anyway, we did it and it was amazing. And we learned that the oldest living survivor of Bataan at age 105 just died last year.
Wow.
Just blows my mind. I would like to have interviewed him.
Yeah, that would have been a great interview on your YouTube.
Jenny, thank you for working to educate our population, however you can, however we can. Um, what else would you like to say to listeners? I know you've got books out there. You've got books about Unit 731. Again, I'll have links below. What else would you like for our listeners to know?
I think people need to, I think the reason why Unit 731 was able to happen is because people started viewing others as lesser than. And, I know that empathy is hard, and especially with this day and age, everyone is in front of a screen. But, we should, as a human, I know this is going to sound cheesy, but as a human, like as a civilization, I think we need to start having more understanding with other people, other culture, and not see others as lesser than, because that's going to be when tragedies strike.
Yes. Jenny, thank you so much for sharing even just a little bit of what you know, and I know there's a whole lot more. Um, Listeners out there, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. I'll have links below, and please get Jenny's book. Uh, Go to the website and learn more about this and share this with other people who are interested in history and other people who might not be interested in history but who should be interested in it and who should learn a little bit more. Jenny, thank you so much. Keep being awesome, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you for
All
having
right.
me.
You're absolutely welcome. Take care, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.